Hi guys, so today I'm making another video in my series about celebrating the 100-year anniversary of some women in the UK gaining the vote. And my first video was about female historical fiction, and today I'm going to be talking about some feminist non-fiction recommendations. So I'll just start right away because I've got a few to get through. So firstly, I want to talk about a book that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of and maybe read yourself, but it is We Should All Be Feminists by Chimimanda Ngozi Adichie, which is a short pamphlet that is based on one of the TED Talks that she's done. It talks about the responsibility of both men and women to take up the mantle of feminism, and it discusses not only injustices towards women but the power structures that facilitate this, specifically the expectation on masculinity among men, and how this leads to frail egos and misogyny towards women. There was a quotation that I really liked in this pamphlet that says, "Culture does not make people, people make culture." And I saw that as quite an optimistic way of looking at things. She is clearly saying that there are huge worldwide problems with misogyny, but these can be undone through engagement with the ideas and direct action against it. I also really liked that it talked about women's complicity in misogyny. I feel like this is something that gets glossed over a bit in feminist non-fiction. But of course, misogyny and patriarchy are cultural constructs, and they affect women just as much as they affect men. So it's really easy for women to fall into the trap of acting in a subconsciously misogynist way towards other women. Specifically, I think the desire to be likeable that is so common in women is one of those cultural constructs that is definitely harmful towards women, but it's so ingrained that it's hard to deviate from. The anecdotes in this essay mostly come from Chimamanda's Nigerian background, and I think the issues surrounding misogyny are definitely more overt there, but she does talk about universal issues that affect everyone, so I certainly wouldn't be put off from this. Because it's not always directly talking about the UK. I think this is a global issue, and it's really important to learn about the global implications of misogyny and feminism. Next, I have an essay collection to mention, and it's called Nasty Woman, and it's a collection of 20 essays from a very diverse range of women talking about what it's like to be a woman in the 21st century. And the title, as I'm sure you can guess, is derived from Donald Trump's labelling of Hillary Clinton during one of the presidential debates as a nasty woman, simply for daring to disagree with him. And it feeds into the narrative that surrounds women who are called bossy or a bitch if they're in a position of power, simply for doing the same job as a man. I think this is a really nice collection of essays because it is so diverse. It talks about women from all different backgrounds, and of different classes and sexualities, and it really, I think in quite a short space, it covers so many different elements of womanhood and raises so many issues about feminism. The next one I want to mention is a bit different from the others because it's a little bit older. The other ones I'm talking about are generally within the last 10 years. And also this one's written by a man, which makes it different to the others I want to mention. But it's John Berger's Ways of Seeing, which was originally a BBC documentary in the early 70s and then was adapted into a book of the same name. It's all about perceptions regarding art, and in particular the one I'm interested in is the second episode, and I think it's also the second chapter in the book, and it's about how women are represented in the European oil painting, specifically looking at the nude. It follows much of the same argument as the prominent feminist film theorist Laura Mulvey, who talks about spectatorship and spectacle in cinema. And John Berger's argument is that the women in these paintings are presented in a passive way for the gratification of heterosexual male spectators. I find critical discourse about representations of women in media really interesting, partly because I studied film studies academically, but I think it's really important to critically analyse the ways women are represented in all types of media, from film and TV and music, and books, of course, and also certainly video games. I think that's a really interesting one, but also more traditional forms of artwork like painting and sculpture. And I think it's important because these representations do really affect and represent the ways in which we treat women in real life. I think sexualization and fetishization of women in media is a real problem that is ongoing in the 21st century, but I think it's one that we should talk about because it is one we can change actively through understanding of it and through action to overcome it. Next is another one I've mentioned before and I know other booktubers have talked about, and it is Woman in Power by Mary Beard. She's an acclaimed British classicist who has written books on the Roman Empire, including SPQR, and she's also hosted some BBC TV documentaries about the ancient world. As a result of this, she's faced an incredible amount of backlash and misogyny on Twitter for not conforming to the expected levels of attractiveness of women on television, and she's great because she has really made a stand against this, and she makes some great points about how women are treated in the media and links these ideas back into antiquity. It talks about the implications of a gendered power structure that implicitly allows men more access to power, and although it doesn't give many explicit answers about how we can resolve this, I think it is a manifesto in that it is trying to open a discourse about this topic, and through a greater understanding of the issues we can now try and come up with some solutions. Next is Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates, and this book is a follow-up to the Everyday Sexism Project, an online tool where women could submit their stories regarding everyday sexism that they've encountered in their lives. Laura Bates began this when she was just sick of the everyday harassment and injustices and misogyny that she faced, and she was absolutely overwhelmed by the volume and the diversity of the response. This book is divided into sections including women in the media, women in politics, girlhood, men, and it deals with topics as diverse as street harassment, domestic violence, and how the female body is portrayed in the media. Each chapter starts with a series of hard-hitting facts and statistics about the topic of that chapter, and then it's interspersed with the individual testimonies of these women that come from the Twitter page and also the online submission tool, and also Laura Bates' own analysis. I think its power comes from the sheer volume and diversity of the issues that these women face, and the fact that so many of them are relatable as a woman reading it, and especially when you read entries from very young girls who are already so disillusioned about their place in the world. But I did also find it quite an optimistic book. I saw it as a direct precursor to the Me Too movement, and the ways in which women are now speaking up more against the misogyny and sexual violence that they experience. So I do think we are moving in the right direction in that case. The next one is another collection of essays, and it was the one that I enjoyed reading most out of all of them actually. It's Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, and it's a mixture of personal and more academic essays about feminism and her direct experiences with misogyny, as well as more academic theorising on the subject. But what I liked particularly about it is that it injected a little bit of lightness into the topic where there really isn't much in the other books I've talked about. Roxane Gay is a black journalist, writer and professor, and she talks in this book about the various experiences she's had around feminism, including really candid discussions of a horrendous sexual assault that she experienced when she was just 12, and also the more day-to-day varieties of misogyny that she encounters. I really enjoyed the chapters where she analyses the representation of women, and in particular black women, in the media, mostly films including The Help and Django Unchained, 12 Years a Slave, and also the Netflix show Orange is the New Black. She calls herself a bad feminist because she admits enjoying music that is really degrading to women. She's unsure about the usefulness of things like trigger warnings, and she wants to interrogate some of the issues surrounding feminism that will often make her be perceived to be a bad feminist. I think it allows her to have a lot of nuance in her arguments because she's unafraid of broaching uncomfortable topics without tiptoeing around them. And I do think it helps that she injects some humour into her writing. Of course, there are a lot of topics in here that are no laughing matter, and it isn't the purpose of these books to be a right laugh when you're reading them, but it does help if they're engaging to read and not overly dry. The last one I want to talk about is a little bit less meaty than the others. It is quite short and maybe not as comprehensive. It's Rebecca Solnit's Men Explain Things to Me, which is a collection of essays as well, but it is a lot shorter than most of them. And it deals with a smaller range of topics, the title one being, of course, this idea of mansplaining, although she doesn't really like this term specifically. Of course, you know what it means, the idea that I'm mansplaining it to you. The idea that men explain things to her as a woman, and she's in academia, so she knows what she's talking about, but of course some men think they know better because they're a man. I think this title essay was the strongest part of the whole book. The other ones were interesting as well. They take a slightly more academic tone than some of the other books I've talked about, and I think they give you a good insight into a few of the issues surrounding feminism and misogyny, but yeah, it's not as comprehensive. I think it's the kind of thing that would make a nice gift. It is actually a very beautiful hardback book. It would make a nice gift for someone who is just starting to get interested in the topic of feminism but doesn't want to be bombarded with a 400-page tome telling them how they should think. So those were all the recommendations I wanted to give you today. Let me know if there are any recommendations you want to give to me, because I'm always on the lookout for new, interesting feminist non-fiction books. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you really soon with another one that will be about some feminist novels that I've read recently. So I'll see you then. Bye bye.